Ocarina of Time is a game to influence all games. Without this game, we wouldn't have gotten Okami, no Soul Reaver, Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, Final Fantasy 15, GTA 3, Pepsi Man, Conker's Bad Fur Day. Now that is a lot of games. So obviously that means that this is the greatest game of all time. Gamers have been pretty universal about how they feel about this game, but not everyone agrees on where it should be placed on the Zelda tier list. It did carry the N64's doo-doo ass launch by dropping 2 years after Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wings.
Pilot Wings 64.
Today I want to yap about why Ocarina of Time is the most influential game of all time. And that's not an exaggeration. You can tell because of the amount of times I said time. My first time ever playing Zelda was Breath of the Wild. So playing Ocarina of Time and discovering all the pre-evolutions of Nintendo's game design felt like opening a family photo album. Flipping through the pages, seeing the series grow up with the most memorable soundtrack in gaming history pulled straight out of this game. It's arguably the most important game in the series because it created the formula that we see now in modern Zelda games. There is one thing that all three of these games have in common. Help every faction to gain the power to save Hyrule. Link's kinda like Elf Thanos in this game with all the fucking Infinity Stones. Except there's now only 4 of them in the new games instead of 6. But listen, this is gonna be a little crazy to hear because I lied. This game actually has 9 of them. Before being sent off, the Deku Tree gives Link a Kokiri Stone, sending him off to go see the Princess of Hyrule. Zelda gets him up to speed about the Sacred Realm and the power of the Triforce. Ganon's trying to do some anime villain bullshit again. Wait a minute, that sounds pretty familiar. With the only thing locking the door to the Sacred Realm being the Ocarina of Time. I don't know if anyone gets my point yet. This is a Nintendo 64 game with that much structured narrative on a thick-ass 32 megabyte cartridge. Sony's PlayStation was the other major rival, holding a fat 500 megs on their one disc. It's the only reason they could pack voice acting in games like Kudelka and Silent Hill. Between this game and Tears of the Kingdom, I can't really decide which one has the more coherent story. Actually, Tears of the Kingdom looks more like an homage to Ocarina of Time than you would think. The storyline is extremely similar but polished to fit the Breath of the Wild style. There's a lot more Giga lore added to the foundations of Zelda. Whether it looks like little teardrop pebbles or the Triforce, the goal is the same. This bad man is trying to assemble the 3 pieces of Exodia. The Triforce has been an absolute symbol of power in Zelda for decades. 3 magical triangles of virtues: power, wisdom, and courage. I think Skyward Sword was the last time they brazenly showed the Triforce in the logo, or even included it in its narrative. In this game, Zelda has a much bigger presence compared to the other ones, supporting Link throughout his adventure under the guise of Sheik. Actually, something interesting about the growth of the Zelda series is the way it evolved. Classic Zelda had this weird, gothic fantasy art style that's very similar to Castlevania. The enemies in particular are all a bunch of ugly contortions of like normal creatures. Eventually that style naturally faded away with time as more games were made, embracing that fantasy cartoon style. Breath of the Wild concept art had hints of this style in it before being scrapped. Twilight Princess is the only other modern Zelda game I can think of that has a darker tone to its world and characters. Is any of this shit important? No, but I think it's kind of cool. Gameplay in Hyrule. Unlike Sonic Adventure, everything in the world functions exactly how they should. It all just snaps together like a little set of Lego bricks, with the overall gameplay slowly building itself out, brick by brick, filled with hundreds of tiny little details. The Hylian shield is too big for Link, so he just crouches the block. His little thumb when you pull out the slingshot, like all of it is so intricate. The map detail is kind of wild because the map isn't even that big. This version of Hyrule is super small compared to the majority of the modern games. It's somehow super dense, but looks empty at the same time. Bunch of secrets, little collectibles, and minigames to play. All the side quests even have upgrades in them as rewards, so it's incentivizing you to do these quests. You might even trip some puzzles by mistake. Link trips over a fucking rock. Before we lived in a world of Ubisoft towers, Ocarina of Time existed before that utopia where Nintendo dunked on expectations of what was possible with a semi-open world. And then there's the Ocarina in all this. I both love and hate this damn thing. The Ocarina was a great way of adding more complexity to such a simple game, but the Song of Time handicaps the fun. Yeah, dude, I love playing the same song up to 3 times within the same room, you know? That shit was fun. That was so goated. I loved doing that. You go into the Temple of Time to pull out the Master Sword, and it sends you 7 years into the future. Because you did this, Ganondorf has pierced the Sacred Realm and has gained the Triforce of Power, so the world has changed. The map is the same, but with completely different circumstances. Hyrule Castle is in shambles after Ganon has been laughing at his own jokes for 7 years. Although the Spirit Temple kinda makes it feel stupid when you have to teleport back and forth from the temple to Hyrule repeatedly to change from young Link to adult Link to get both sections of the temple done. Now that I think about it, I kinda have a weird opinion on the musical instruments in Zelda games. It gave them this artful presentation. It felt elegant in a way, if you understand what I mean. But Breath of the Wild kind of shuts up the point that I was making. Cass was sort of like a middle ground. Too bad he had no appearance in Tears of the Kingdom. If I'm being real with myself, Zelda as a series is probably better off without having the musical instruments, but I kinda wanna see them come back, but just designed better. Changing the time, making it rain, summoning your horse, fast travel, or even for a few puzzle solutions. Like, man, it almost seems like there was mechanics in Breath of the Kingdom that relied on these things. The puzzles are usually pretty simple, but the cryptic nature of them makes you think otherwise. It's been a long time since I've played a game where I genuinely got lost. The world isn't really trying to spoon feed everything in your mouth in a few pop-ups. Dungeons, temples, or even out in the semi-open world, every facet is filled with well-crafted challenges. They just drag on a bit too long, like an hour and 30 minutes too long. Nintendo, no, Japanese game developers, they love taking a single action and stretching it into multiple steps. Even with modern games, they do this shit a lot. Which is hilarious because at the same time, this old-ass game has some of the most time saver ass shit with like multiple ways to fast travel. Other than that, the temples and the dungeons were unique experiences. The shadow and the forest temples were probably my favorite areas in the game. The Donkey Kong bongo drum dude is probably just the most creatively designed boss I've seen in actual years. I know it sounds like I'm just gassing it up, but I had a genuine fun time fighting that boss. But let me get real for a second. Fuck the jackass who made the fucking water temple. I'm not gonna explain it, because if you know, you just know. And yeah, maybe playing Master Quest instead of the original probably wasn't the smartest idea, but it probably wouldn't make me hate it any less. Combat would have been the one thing that I would have praised perfectly if not for the camera and the enemies. And trust, it's got nothing to do with camera jank or the variety, because there's plenty of that. It's how you kill enemies. You beat every enemy in the game the same way. Block until the enemy lets you hit them. Obviously, it's not all of them. Some enemies only take damage from like hook shots or bombs, but for most enemies, the ultimate Giga cheat code is just walking left. The real revolutionary part of Ocarina was its camera. I've played modern games that this game's camera just completely dunks on, like fucking nuts and face everything. It flows together so smoothly, panning alongside the player, not fighting you for control over it. All the specific rendered rooms have perfect viewpoints. Some of them even have that Resident Evil style, but better because you can swap between 2 different angles. It's crazy to see how flawless the camera work in this game was. What's truly amazing is how quickly it turns to shit for combat though. First, let's not pretend that the combat targeting wasn't the biggest hoorah for the games industry. The only reason this downside even exists is because the camera is controlled mainly by the game's AI. It was the first game to ever feature a camera system this precise, this cinematic. Yeah, you're welcome, Miyazaki. While the combat camera makes me think of MC Hammer, I can still put respect on it everywhere else. Speaking of putting respect on something, sound design is the last thing I want to talk about. I'm gonna use the A word again, but this game has an atmosphere. But it's not quite like the other games that get this description. The crackling of the torches, every different surface you stomp on, the flowing water of the riverbank, crickets chirping in the pale moonlight, the wriggling of the sculpture. I shouldn't have to give any head to the soundtrack because, come on, it's Zelda. I think I actually get what people say when they say it feels like Zelda. Breath of the Kingdom has that cool ambient brilliance to it. All the single little piano keys and the sounds are a vibe for sure, but fuck, Zelda has this sense of adventure in its music that's just missing from Breath of the Kingdom. Just listen to any Zelda soundtrack compared to this game. One is cinematic Zelda, while the other just screams The Legend of Zelda. In conclusion, you ever gone on a trip to a place you've never been before? That's what Ocarina felt like. Going on an adventure that you didn't know existed. And you don't want to miss this one. I wish I could have gone back and explored more of the world because I'm sure I've missed a bunch. But I don't want to replay it again. So, Majora's Mask next, maybe? Stay tuned anyway.
And I'm not asking